Welcome along everyone to TeamsNation September's Meetup. Excited to be hosting this one's first time I've hosted a TeamsNation Meetup, so excited to be in this seat. I've joined a lot of them in the past, but been in the background, presented at some, so it's nice to be on the other side of the table and helping the people that are presenting and be able to listen in and so on to that. Just before we go into our speakers today, a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of info if you've never joined one of the TeamsNation's meetups before. But TeamsNation is people who are passionate about Microsoft Teams, where we get together, we invite people to come and speak, they share their knowledge, whether they're practicing for an event or whether they've seen something new and they want to talk about it. People come along and share what it is they want to talk about. TeamsNation started back in 2019 with Chris Ward, Adam and Vesku at the helm with Chris Webb as well. And then recently myself, Paul Dredge and Matty have joined to help out because TeamsNation is growing. It's growing and it's great to see it evolve over time. It's such a great community to be a part of. And be involved in. It's just fantastic to see, and I can already see people joining now. So the numbers are going up. So it's brilliant to see the people join. Like I said, if anyone does want to speak at any of these events moving forward, please do get in contact with one of the team on the screen there. You can reach out to us on Twitter and LinkedIn and so on, and speak to us if you do want to speak at one of these sessions. Web address is on there as well to go onto that web address and post on there. If you want to get involved at all, handlers for TeamsNation is on here. So we've got Twitter, we're on Meetup, we've got the website. Again, that monthly Meetup link to if you want to speak on the events. If you want to watch previous events that we've done or the bigger events and sessions people have done there, then please do visit our YouTube. Remember to subscribe to it, visit it, take a look and check out some of those videos. And then LinkedIn as well, great way to keep up to date on things. We've got two great speakers today joining us. Really excited to hear them because when I saw what they were going to be speaking about, I was like, this is exactly the stuff I'm doing at the minute in work world of things. So it's going to be really interesting to see that. I think that this is timed perfectly for me. So we've got Ville, who's going to be speaking about workplace analytics and how to access it from Viva Insights. And then we've got Sean coming on afterwards. He's going to be talking to us about mastering the governance in using Microsoft Teams through automation. I mean, who doesn't love a bit of automation and being able to streamline some of that things? But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ville, and you can go ahead and share your screen. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much. So, everyone can see my screen now, right?
Yep, come through.
Perfect. Fine. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. My name is Ville Gullstrand, and I'm here to talk about Viva Insight, or perhaps mostly the cool back-end part of Viva Insight, that is workplace analytics. But our story don't really begin here, does it? It began about 1.5 years ago with a pandemic hitting hard. Not many would anticipate what was to become of this, and we used to travel, to socialize. We would meet in big groups. We would have events just like this in person. And we would spend countless hours commuting to the offices and back home. So we did some great stuff and we did some terrible time and energy wasting activities back then. And then we had to start adapting and changing. And this is always tough, but we had to do it fast, which is even tougher. And this whole process, it kind of changed us a little bit. Some things changed for the better, others changed for the worse. Personally, I can't tell you how much I love not traveling 3 to 4 days a week for meetings in distant cities that could have been done over Teams. But on the other hand, I'm currently so socially starved that I sometimes think I'm going to go crazy. And interestingly, there are a lot of people who prefer this amount of socializing and feel that this part has really improved their mental health by not having the pressure of constantly meeting others. That's just the thing about behavior. It's a lot like habits in the sense that there really are no good or bad ones. A habit isn't good or bad. They just are. You are really the one labeling one as bad and another as good, but your brain draws no line between them. Now, a habit is broken down into three parts. There's the trigger, the routine, and a signal. And the trigger is something that really, triggers the habit that you have. Then, I'm sorry, this could be a certain smell when you enter through the front door, for example. And the routine is what automatically kicks in when triggered. You hang off your coat, you take off your shoes and start walking to the couch. You slide down in the seat, perhaps. And now comes the signal, which is what tells you that the routine is done and you can now go back to manually functioning again. You're not on autopilot anymore. And this could be the feeling of relief as you take a deep breath from the couch, or the brightness of your mobile screen starting to shine in your face. Some would claim that this is a good habit because it helps them relax after a long day at work. And others would say, this is a complete waste of time. It would have been much better to be productive when I'm coming home. So essentially what I'm trying to bring in here, it's important that we bring this mindset into the discussions of Viva Insight as well, that this is the way we work, and behaviors and habits are just that. They are not always good or bad. And the system that we're using, Workplace Analytics, it cannot really tell if you're doing a good thing by sending emails during meeting hours. It can assume that this is a bad thing, but maybe this was actually a work meeting that was aiming to send out informational emails. So at the end of the day, we need to interpret the information and act upon it the best we can. And when faced with a theory, which we will have a lot of when you see what I'm about to show you, you should really look into proving it before you enforce this on others, like work colleagues and such. Now, what has all of this to do with Viva Insight, you might say? Well, let's bring Viva Insight into the game here. To gain access to Viva Insight, you can add the app in Microsoft Teams for yourself, or your Teams admin can activate it for you. You do that under the three dots on the left side menu of Teams. And if you have already installed or activated Insight, it will show up as an app up in the left corner, and then you can just pin that to the menu if you want to keep it there forever. And if you haven't activated it, you will find it under More Apps, just like any other app. And it looks kind of like this. So it's mainly using data from my analytics to give you insight into how you personally spend your time, your habits, and your behaviors. And you are the only one who can see this. It could also be used to, let's say, protect time by blocking your calendar with focus time. See, we humans, we tend to go into something called flow. And when we do, and we do that when we have spent around 20 minutes doing the same thing uninterrupted. So you're in flow when you feel super productive and you can just create so much stuff and make stuff, and it just feels like you're getting a ton of work done. And this is what many feel when working after hours. They get much more done because they're not interrupted by colleagues, notifications, and other disturbances. Thing is, you're actually in control of your time during office hours as well. So when blocking your calendar, by using focus time like this in Viva Insight, you will get the status focusing in Microsoft Teams, and that resembles do not disturb. So the technology is trying to help you here, and it's really up to you if you want to use it and really honor your own focus time by actually not letting yourself become distracted during this time. That way, maybe you could save some after hours. Okay, so this is all great, right? And this is Viva Insight. Maybe you have activated it, maybe you've tried it out, you know the drill. Where comes Workplace Analytics into the picture? Well, let me bring in a demo image, a little bit brighter, like this. If we have Workplace Analytics activated in our tenant, then we would have two more tabs up in the top of Viva Insight. So you would have My Team and you would have My Org. And these tabs show information from Workplace Analytics, given that your organization then, as I said, have licenses for that. this is not included in anything else. Like you can have the E5, but you would still have to purchase Workplace Analytics on top of that. My team will show you, as a manager, the average values of your team. So as long as you are unable to drill down to to less than 5 people, you will be able to see my team and the things going on there. And this threshold really goes throughout the entire Workplace Analytics system. So you can never go down on an individual level, but you could say that it's kind of like my analytics for the whole organization. Again, you can never go down to fewer than 5 people in the group. And this threshold can actually be increased, but you could never decrease it. And my org will show up to anyone in your company and expose them to the organization's overall data. So this gives you a way to compare yourself, like your habits and your behavior. How does that compare to the rest of the organization? And it exposes you to research about well-being, innovation, change management, meeting culture, and much more that you might otherwise have been unaware of. And when reading about the research, you can then compare these insights to your own organization. So it all kind of is connected to each other. And with that, I think it's time we actually open up Workplace Analytics and show you guys how that would actually look, right? And let's just change to another window like this. Hopefully you can see Workplace Analytics right now. So to get access here, you would have to go to workplaceanalytics.office.com, and you can log in using your tenant account. But if you don't have Workplace Analytics, you will end up with a nasty error message saying that the service is unavailable. So you need the licenses first. But if you do, you will find this view. And as you can see on the left side, we don't really have that much of a menu. So Workplace Analytics clearly looks like it doesn't really have that much. But trust me, there is plenty of information here. So let's start on the home screen. If we go down here, we have a few cards, each of them consisting of some metrics calculated for us. So these are built into Workplace Analytics. We don't really need to have any kind of data mining skills to get started. And we don't barely have to do any kind of calculations to get started and actually start working with these numbers, because we can also just download a PowerPoint from here, which would consist of a lot of all of this information composed for us with these actual numbers inside of them. So you don't even have to spend time setting up your PowerPoint. Actually, I could even show you that one like this. It's almost like I'm a chef from TV here, right? That kind of had this available from 2 days ago. So in here, I've downloaded one of these PowerPoints. It has 41 slides, so I can just remove anything that I'm not interested in showing and presenting. And all of these, if I go down to one of them, like Protect Employee Wellbeing, is actually populated with the information from our Workplace Analytics environment. So all of these graphs, all of these numbers are from our environment, and we don't have to copy paste anything to get here. And we would also get links back to Workplace Analytics if we want to go back into the system and actually dig down into the data. And each of these pages that we see now, they will have, well, obviously a subject line like Protect Employee Wellbeing. They will have a link to supporting evidence, so we can go down and actually see why would this matter? Why would we want to track this kind of metric? It will give us an overall KPI value that we can use as a baseline if we want to, for example, improve things. And it will give us 3 key insights based on our data. So in our case, we have provided Workplace Analytics with a couple of groups that people belong to. And what Workplace Analytics have done is found out the most affected groups of this specific metrics. That is employees working after hours for more than 5 hours a week. And we have 92 people out of the 155 in human resources doing that specific thing. So it helps us to narrow down, not on an individual level, but on a group level of at least 5 people, where we should pinpoint our resources and have the most effects of this. And we also get 3 actionable tasks like suggestions, what we could do with the specific KPI. We could create a norm of scheduling focus time that we just saw in Viva Insight by protecting time. We could enable MI Analytics Wellbeing Insights if we don't already have it, exposing our employees to their own insights of how much time they are spending after hours or surrounding the actual office hours. I should say that after hours in this context also means before you start working. So any time outside of your normal office hours. And it also suggests actually using together mode in Teams, which could in a way protect employee well-being. Again, look at the supporting evidence. We have found video fatigue going down significantly if you're using together mode instead of the typical square view that you would end up in a normal meeting. So we get a lot of this information just out of the box. We could just download the PowerPoint, go straight into the management meeting. Or we could head back into, whoops, sorry guys. I usually don't have two screens, so that's usually where I have the button to share a window. Or like this, we could go back into Workplace Analytics and we can actually check one of these boxes. So we go into the box of Enhance Organizational Resilience, and we will find these boxes that were in the PowerPoint, well, boxes like slides. And we can go down in here and see all this fresh data. And as we saw before, we have the same kind of KPIs, and if we do have like actionable things we can do about this, we can click on See Your Insights to get further down into the data. So here we have the suggestion of scheduling recurring one-on-one meetings, prepare discussion points for one-on-one meetings, but we should stay flexible, and enhance manager coaching with My Analytics. Now, notice that none of these things tells you how to do them. It just tells you that these are things that you could do. But if your organization, let's say, is rather small, or you're all sitting together, then maybe a town hall meeting to explain this would be good. In other organizations, it might be better to bring in all the managers from different regions to have this kind of discussion going on. So how you do these things, totally up to you. This just tells you the way people tend to behave in this environment. So with all of these, we get some actionable things. And in this case, we have explore the stats. But if we go to another one, I think we could go up here again, protect employee well-being, and go to our insights. We also have explore the stats in Workplace Analytics, explore the stats in Power BI, which means that this specific KPI is actually... Oh, sorry. So this specific KPI is actually connected to one of the Workplace Analytics Power BI templates that comes with the system. So we can download that one, and we can get all the data into Power BI, where we can really dig down into this information. And we could also create a plan out of this. If we do click on Explore the Stats, it's bringing us to this page, so we don't really have to use Power BI if we don't like to, and we get some pre-calculated information based on what we just selected, in this case, teamwork. And we can select, like here, which group have the highest collaboration outside of working hours, or which groups are spending the most time in email outside of working hours. And we have the averages of these different groups down here. If I select one of these and scroll down, oops, maybe I should have, yeah, perfect. Then I have selected 155 people out of the group of 2,326 people. And scrolling down, I will see some highlighting information about how this small group of 155 differs from the rest of the 2,326. They have 25% more more time in email. They have 17% more collaboration hours, which is time they spend collaborating with others, like in meetings, sending emails, or calling in Teams, for example. And they have 14% more times in meetings. Now, let's say that we may not like what we're seeing here. We have decided that this is a bad behavior. As human beings, we have that right. So we can start a plan to change this. And clicking this will bring up the create a new plan view. And this plan, we can name it Wellbeing Plan. It's going to be it's going to durate between right now until the 18th of December. And the target is to have 5% decrease in after hours collaboration, for example. And we can change all of this metrics and what we want to plan on actually changing. And the participants, well, it's going to use the filter that we selected before, but I could also upload a CSV file with the names of the actual people we want to change. And when we validate this, it's going to make sure that we don't have any other plan going on that has the same kind of impact, or that we are like these people are already engaged in the plan to decrease their after hours collaboration, because then that would be just too much. It would be unuseful, really. So when that's validated, it's going to tell us that all is good in the hood, or like in this case, whoops, all of them are already in a plan, so no one will actually be affected. But it could say that like 100 of the 155 will be affected, and they have not been in the plan, making it possible for us to create this plan. And now this goes back to Viva Insight again, because this plan will appear in these users' Viva Insight for them to opt into. So we never force anyone to be participating in anything of this, but we kind of encourage them to adopt this plan and to be part of decreasing their after hours collaboration by 5%. And anyone opting into this will be measured in this plan. So if we go back, if we actually close this one down like this and go to plans on this left side, we can track the progress of all our ongoing plans, but we don't really know exactly who is involved. We only knew on a group level who is involved, and we can see the progress of how we're slowly maybe decreasing after hours or meeting hours or collaboration hours or multitasking in meetings or whatever we set up to actually track. Now, if this wasn't enough, let's see where I am in my slides as well. If this isn't enough, we could also go into Analyze and choose the Query Designer. So in here, we have some pre-created for us, or we can get started with creating our own. These are the different types of queries we could create. And when we create a query, we look into details on, for example, on a personal level, not individual level, but more like what is the average person doing in terms of collaboration hours after hours, for example, or how many meetings is the average person typically having. But here we can also apply filters. So we could say, for example, we only look into the sales force of our company, or we only look into a specific type of group that we have set up in the system, and it could never really know what we were about to do beforehand. So we had to tell it that our sales team is actually called Sales Team East Wing Tree, for example. And we could look into like meeting habits. We can look into how groups affect other groups, like how much collaboration time is actually generated in the sales team based on the marketing team. So how much of the meeting hours, for example, do the sales team have because of the marketing team? Or how much is a certain group of or a certain person affecting other groups? So we can do all these kind of different things. And then we have also the peer comparison. Now, usually when I start to present what workplace analytics is, and you bring up all these insights that you can get, people tend to say like, oh, this is awesome. Can we find out who are the top performers in our environment? And the thing is, as I said before, we can really only say that people show a certain behavior. We can not say that this is a good or bad behavior. So no, Viva Insight, Workplace Analytics cannot tell you who your top performers are. But if you tell it who you think your top performers are, then it can tell you how that group is behaving compared to the other people. So for example, let's say you go in here and we want to make a peer analysis. So we click a new analysis. then we can upload a file or select from filters down here certain people in the reference group. Let's say, for example, the ones with highest sales numbers, and it will generate, and then we will, for the other group, put in all the other sales teams or all the other sales persons. And this is going to generate all the differences in behaviors between the reference group of our top salespeople with all the other salespeople. And maybe it will tell us stuff like the top performers, they seem to have way bigger internal networks, or they spend this amount of time focusing every week, or they spend less time in meetings than the average salesperson. And what we can then do is take this information and really build this into our education or internal learning, like leadership training. We could then focus really on getting our managers to prioritize focus time or employee well-being based on the behaviors that we want to drive. So super useful, but I want to emphasize you can't use workplace analytics to find people who are your best people. You can only tell it the other way around. These are the best people. I want to see how they differ from the rest of the group. And let's see if I can find myself back into my notes here. Right, so yeah, basically I could really go on for, I don't know, a couple of days probably, going through all the different things that you can do in here. One last thing that I will show you, the query designer. When we have created queries, we'll find the results under here. You can find your own results in this tab, but the good thing is that any person who is an analyst in Workplace Analytics that has access to this view will also see the results of every query that every other person is doing. So you never have to do the same query twice. If another person has made a query, then I can just use that information, download the same information, and start working on analyzing that. Some of these, as you can see, have a visualization icon on them. That's because they are built-in queries that comes with the system. And when they do have that icon, you can also click download and select between the CSV file if you just want to make some simple analytics on it, or the Power BI template. So you can actually set up the Power BI reports for the rest of your organization or the group of people who should have access to this kind of information, and you don't have to give them access to the full workplace analytics environment. So it really is deeply connected to Viva Insight. You can reach out to your users back into Viva Insight from Workplace Analytics, and you can bring them, for example, Power BI reports in tabs, in Teams, but they are based on this backend Workplace Analytics environment. And with that, I'll go back to presenting this screen. And if you're interested in hearing more about all of this workplace analytics stuff or Viva Insights stuff, then I will post these 4 links into the chat window. If you're really quick, you can take a print screen of it right now as well. And as a summary, I would like to say you own your own time. So regardless of what any number will tell you, you own your own time. And even if you set up focus hour in your calendar, it really won't help you unless you honor it by actually don't allowing for distractions. You can close your door. You can actually, decide not to respond when people write to you in chat windows, or you can choose not to answer your phone if you are currently focusing. So if you set aside time to focus, work on the discipline to actually doing so, and you will probably save some after hours work. So to get started already today, make a communication campaign aiming to inform people that you already have Viva Insight inside Teams. Push that out and show that to everyone, really. Talk to your Teams administrator and make sure that everyone have Viva Insight, because that way people can at least start to embrace the information given to them and spend time to analyze how they themselves are spending their own time. And when you have that culture going and when you have that start going, which is free, then you can look into workplace analytics as well as kind of like a next step. because then you're already started. And that's when you grow into the organizational level, like My Analytics, but on the organizational level. Perhaps the most important key takeaway of all, act, do something. The data is already in here. It's processed for your benefit, so you don't really need to spend that much time putting together this data into useful insight, not from Viva Insight either, or My Analytics. And it really is up to us to just push it a little bit and do something about this. Ask your management team to analyze their own Viva Insight, put their thoughts into an intranet message, and get your journey started. And of course, finally, workplace analytics cannot tell you who your top performers in the organization is. If you tell it who your top performers are, it can, however, tell you how they behave. And this input can then be used in education for the rest of the company. So with that, I would like to open if you have any kind of questions. I'll keep the slide up until
cheers for that, Ville.
Until the next.
I've just allowed everyone to turn their mic on. So if you do have a question, please feel free to come off mute to ask your question, or use the chat if you prefer to use the chat. Great presentation though, taking you through the workplace analytics side of things. I mean, when working with organizations, what's like the main question they ask you when you're doing this with them?
The main question is usually in the beginning, the top performer part, like, who are the top performers? What can we do more of? What should we do less of? But actually, there's a built-in number that is really useful, and that usually is the main aspect, I would say, when you get started, and that's bad meetings. So workplace analytics will actually analyze all the time spent in what it would calculate as a bad meeting. And a bad meeting could be that you are someone or a lot of people are multitasking during this meeting, so it's probably not a good meeting. And there are multiple level of hierarchies available in this meeting. So you are attending, your boss is attending, and your boss's boss is attending. So what is really your boss doing there? She or he will probably be undermined by that person's boss being in the meeting as well. And like really long meetings or really big meetings with a lot of people. So that kind of adds up to a number. You can tell workplace analytics exactly how much each person is worth on an hourly rate, or you can just send it like this is a generic hourly rate, and it will actually tell you how many millions you are spending on bad meetings on a month. So that's usually the first thing you want to start working with, because it's so obvious, like, whoa, are we spending this money on nothing? Not anymore.
Yeah, we've got a question coming to the chat from Stephanie. She said, can workplace analytics only be accessed by admins? I cannot access it like you.
Yes, so there are 3 roles in workplace analytics. It's the admin role, and then the analyst role, and then there's an analyst light role. And the analyst light role cannot create queries. You can only see the insight that is inside workplace analytics. The admin role is more to set up settings in workplace analytics, like can you drill down to more to 5 people or more, or should that threshold be like 10 people? And as an admin, you're also in charge of uploading a new organizational file, which tells the system like the hourly rate of people, or which group they belong to and which level they are and stuff like that. And so you could have all of these roles or 2 of the roles, or you could have one or the other. Usually you wouldn't have that many people having the analyst role. Like in a big company, I'd say like 5 would do, because then you would usually bring the insight out of the system when you have looked into it and really found insight, and then that would be actionable. That would be something that you bring to a bigger group. And workplace analytics, if you go to workplaceanalytics.office.com and you don't have the licenses in your tenant, then you're going to be faced with like an error 500 message, just saying, whoops, too bad, the service isn't there. So you first need to acquire the licenses. Unfortunately, they are not included in any other SKU. But if you do have the E5 license for people, then those add-on licenses is going to be cheaper than if you have the E3 license.
Brilliant. It was a great presentation. I was engaged all the way through it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. And I can see workplace analytics. I mean, here in the UK, the big topic of discussions, I'm sure it is everywhere else, is around hybrid working and how people are having that mixed remote in-person type of thing. And things like workplace analytics can really help a business understand how people are working. And I think that's a real big thing around it, because I know what you're saying there about the licensing and things like that. Some of the questions I've had from my work is people saying, well, you've got to pay extra, is it worth it, and so on. You think, well, the insight you're getting into your organization, you're never going to get in any other way.
Exactly. And actually, I have two things to add to that. The first thing is, when you add the licenses, so then you will actually get access to 13 months of data into the history, because all this data is actually generated and stored in your tenant. You just don't have access to it until you buy the licenses. But this is a good thing, because then the moment you buy the licenses, boom, you have all the insights. So you have 13 months of comparisons to do and to be able to make more analytics about. And then it's going to save the next 2 years as well. So you will have about 3 years of data in the system total when you've had the system for 3 years. And the other thing is that if you let's say, what was I going to say? Right, yeah, so here's the thing. It works on digital triggers, right? So things you do in your digital world. You send emails, you receive emails, you attend meetings, you do things in Teams, and you store things in OneDrive, for example. And workplace analytics can obviously only look at these things that you do. It can't tell you if that physical meeting that you didn't schedule in Outlook was productive. It can only look at digital footprints. But the pandemic has really forced us to leave digital footprints. So, I mean, now more than ever, you guys will have a ton of data in your environments.
Yeah. That's what's brilliant, isn't it? How it looks back. So it's not like one of these things where you go and buy and then you've got to wait 2 months, 3 months, 4 months before you actually start to see the tool being useful. Yeah. We do have a couple more questions come in. One is, okay, so about, have you seen a real world benefits, or is just one more tool to spend time by looking for different numbers?
So personally, I love spending time looking at numbers, but I also love when you do actionable things on them. So yeah, I clearly understand the question. Many times we're just faced with a lot of data, but we don't really do anything with it. And what I think one of the best examples is actually from Microsoft themselves, where Satya said that he took over as CEO, and they would have these board meetings or leadership meeting, management meeting, and everyone was so prepared. Like they brought all of this insight and data and numbers and spreadsheets and everything. So he started to think that maybe this is actually taking quite a lot of time to bring together, and they started using workplace analytics to find out just how much time are we spending preparing for this meeting. And it turned out that they were actually going 6 rows away from the person attending the meeting. So six levels away from the person attending, people were affected in bringing up information that was going to be presented in this meeting. And the total time it spent gave it an average of a few $1 million for each meeting. So that was the cost of each of these meetings. And when he saw this number, when Satya was presented with these numbers, he'd say that, you know what, guys, you all have Power BI dashboards, you all have really good insight into your operations. Let's just bring what you already know to these meetings. Let's spend less time preparing. And if you are asked the question, or if you're asked the question that you cannot respond to, then you can go and fetch the answer after the meeting instead for that specific question, instead of spending a ton of time finding answers for questions that were never asked. So yeah, but it does really put a lot of how should I say, it has to do a lot about the company culture. Like, are we just looking at data and realize, oh, okay, so this was what it is, or do we actually act upon it? But I see a ton of real world benefits as long as you're actually doing anything with it.
Brilliant. We've got a couple more. One is it the Microsoft Viva Insights capacity license that's required for analysts?
Pass on that one. I should know that one, but maybe they renamed it. It was called the Workplace Analytics Analyst role before, but everything is going to Microsoft Viva these days, so maybe I'm actually outdated on that one. So I don't actually know.
No problem. We can go away and hopefully find out and get back to you. And then the final question then is, can I access the data in MS Graph API? I'm sure this gets asked a lot of times.
Yeah, actually, I haven't looked into that as either, because kind of the point of the query editor is to create queries that you can then download as an API. So you can get the API link directly from a result in the query editor, and then you can just connect directly to Workplace Analytics. So you don't actually have to connect through the Graph API. When you have run a query, you will receive the link, and use that link. You can connect to Excel or Power BI, or if you have a script running that you want to download the data constantly, you can do that as well.
Brilliant. Right, well, thank you very much, Ville. It's been brilliant hearing from you. Great knowledge.
Thank you.
I said, the workplace analyst at the beginning, workplace analyst is something that's very topical at the minute with everyone. So great timing. Really good to hear from you.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the next session.
Brilliant. Right, thank you very much. Sean, are you in the room?
I am indeed.
Brilliant stuff. Right, great stuff. Well, I'll hand over to yourself then. So Sean's going to be speaking to us about mastering governance in Microsoft Teams through automation. So hand the reins over to you.
Perfect. So the way I've structured this is I've got some slides to go through some of the high level aspects, but I really want to get into the demo because that's kind of the exciting bit. Okay, and I want to leave time for Q&A as well, because this isn't so much a fixed solution as it is a methodology or a way of thinking about governance in Microsoft Teams. So at a high level, what we'll look at is what tools are available within Microsoft 365, so native tools that can help us govern teams, and then how we bridge that and start automating things. Then we'll look at an example of this process in action and a demo, and then, like I said, leave time at the end for questions. Quick background on myself, I'm not going to spend too long on it. I work at a company called Ergo Group. We're a Microsoft partner. I'm Modern Workplace Practice Lead. I'm recently received the Microsoft MVP award, which I'm quite happy about, in office development. So kind of some of the stuff that you're going to see today. My day-to-day job focuses on everything Microsoft 365, but I'm very passionate about cloud security, automation, and just making that life easier at scale. I've also got a link to my blog there, which I can put in the chat if you like. So on to the good stuff. So Teams is an amazing tool. If you're on this call, you know that, and you fully bought into Teams. It's a game changer for a lot of organizations. One problem with Teams that I've seen, and a lot of people have seen over the years, is it's very easy to adopt, but a lot of organizations will adopt Teams without fully understanding the consequences. A lot of organizations adopt Teams not knowing that they're building out a SharePoint sprawl in the background. So out of the box, really easy to use, but that sprawl does become a problem, particularly for large organizations. A lot of the customers that I speak to now, they have this problem. They've deployed Teams as an emergency solution over the last 2 years, so people can work remotely. And it's worked great for them, but now that everybody's coming back and they want to get some governance on it, they don't know where their data lives. When I had this discussion internally with our organization, my opinion on it is very much that I don't really care how many teams we have, as long as I know they've been set up in a compliant way that meets our policies, right? And it's really important that, because Teams is so easy to use, when you apply governance or security, really on anything, any IT, area of IT, but very important in Microsoft 365, is that when you apply security and governance to it, you can't make the user's job harder, or they will find ways around it. So you got to bring the users along that journey with you, and sometimes that can be through appropriate training and change management, and sometimes it's offering the solution in a different way. So I'm not going to go through every single tool here, but this is a short list of some of the tools that are available to apply governance in Microsoft Teams. So you've got expiration policies and naming policies. You've got DLP in there. MCAS is something that I really like. Retention policies, all that kind of stuff. And then there's some cool functionality brought together under sensitivity labels, which we'll look at today. Sharing policies, so who can share from what site to which external organizations, or is it just internal? MCAS session control for unmanaged devices, and group creation and guest invitation control. So actually controlling who can create a new team or who can bring a guest into the organization. And they're all really cool solutions. I really like them. I think the out-of-the-box solutions are really good. But what seems to be missing, and hopefully we'll kind of look at a solution to this today, is they don't all come together perfectly. A lot of them are disparate solutions, right? So taking out some of the key controls from that last slide, we've got the guest user access control. So whether a guest can come into a team. So if it's your internal HR team, you don't want guest users in there, right? But if it's your collaboration team for one of your biggest customers, you're going to need guests in there. You've got your external sharing policy, so similar enough to guests, but more for people who aren't guests, where you want to share files from that SharePoint side or that team out with someone external. Group privacy, important, whether people can see that team. If it's one of the teams or groups that I see a lot in organizations is pet lovers, and people love to put up pictures of their pets. And to be honest, I can't join them because I've got 2 dogs and I'd just be spamming the thing with pictures of them. So, but it is good to be able to define what sites or teams should be discoverable for users and what sites shouldn't. And then unmanaged device access. So if we've got a policy where our devices are managed by Intune or Azure AD or hybrid Azure AD joined, do we treat that differently to personal devices? Do we give just web-only access, block download, that kind of stuff? But each of those controls have something in common, and that's that they can all be brought together using sensitivity labels. So for anyone who is not familiar with sensitivity labels, they evolved from traditional AIP labels, which evolved from RMS, Azure RMS, and day one, they were a way of classifying data, classifying documents, right? And adding some protections on there. That then evolved into classifying more than just documents, but groups and SharePoint sites. And when I say groups, that also obviously applies to teams. We've got things like automated labeling available to us through Plan 2. So it's a bit more expensive. If you've got an E5 license, M365 E5, you can do things like automated labeling, which is really cool. And there's a lot of functionality in there around how you can protect your documents. When you go to look at the group side of things, sensitivity labels applying to groups can control each of those items that I've just mentioned. So the privacy of the group, whether guests can be brought in, whether a SharePoint site can support external sharing, and also that external access, so that the conditional access app control. So each of those pieces of configuration built on top of each other, brought together under a sensitivity label, really cool, because then we're hitting out 4 different protection mechanisms with one action by applying that label, right? So with that all said, how does it all fit together? So each of those options meets a specific business or security or governance requirement, right? Sensitivity labels can do a whole lot, but the real value with everything in Microsoft 365, in my opinion, is how they integrate. So sensitivity labels are good. Teams, group naming policies, and governance on top of that, even better. And then the SharePoint governance behind that, even better again. And if we look at what automation looks like, so bringing those concepts into an automation perspective, initially, what a lot of organizations do is disable Office 365 group creation and team creation because that stops the sprawl. Now, the knock-on effect of that is that our users then have to log a call with our support desk to get a team created, which isn't ideal because that's load on our support desk and there's turnaround time involved. And we've seen cases with customers where they want to set up a team to collaborate on a new contract with a customer of theirs, and it's time sensitive, and they're held up by that support desk process. And a new team is not a P1 incident, right? It's a service request that will be fulfilled within 8 days or whatever the SLA might be. So the turnaround isn't great there when you offload that to your IT team. So when we disable that functionality for users to self-service teams, we got to provide that in a different way. And by wrapping automation around this whole thing, then we can make it so that it doesn't impact us. Right, so looking at the tools that I would recommend, now we're not limited to this. Like I said, this is very much an idea and a methodology for automating this, but there are so many tools available through Microsoft 365 and externally that you can integrate a lot of different things in. You'll see that as we put this solution together. There's a lot of parts that you could swap out for something that you prefer, or if you want to bring in a third-party vendor to manage some of that, integrate with a service desk ITSM solution, something like that. That's all doable with the tools that are there. But what we'll look at is Azure Automation, Power Apps, using Microsoft Graph API, Logic Apps, and Azure Functions. And you'll see how each of those steps integrate. Power Apps is obviously our user interface. Now, as I said, if you wanted to swap that out for a ITSM tool and have something else trigger that user interface and trigger the workflows through Logic Apps, which is managing that, that's totally fine. So everything here is can be swapped out for your preferred tool. But if we're using all Microsoft tools that are provided to us, then this is a nice way of putting it together. So like I said, Logic Apps manages that workflow. Azure Automation and Azure Functions do all the cool scripty stuff that I love. And the Microsoft Graph API is our API to talk to. That's where we tell Office 365 or Microsoft 365 what we want done. This is an example solution that we'll step through now. So this is a Power App. It's got my amateur design, so I've given it a Teams background, and we're asking the user for a lot of the stuff that they will be asked for when creating a team anyway, but there's a few exceptions you'll see here. So the team name, yeah, that's obvious. You've got to ask them for a name, but you'll also see at the top there that the full team name will actually be, and our naming convention is put on here. So we've got external-team as a prefix onto the team name. And that's because the user chose that this team is going to be external. We'll see the impact of the user choosing that team is external, but at a high level, what that means is that they will be able to invite external guests into that team. I'm ensuring that we prompt them for a second owner because we don't want a team with just one owner in case that user leaves, that team kind of gets lost. We're asking them what external domain they want to share with, because then we're limiting that team to that specific external domain, which allows us to have that real governance when there's a team that we create that we want to share with our customer, Contasa.com. no other customer can accidentally receive a file shared from that team. And then we're giving it a justification. And again, these are the way I set it up, but the way you set it up might be slightly different based on your business requirements. And we will just see the building blocks now. So at the very start, just to jump back one, we've got a check availability. Before the user can create a team, they need to check if that name can be used or if it's used. I've chosen to go with Azure Functions for this. And the reason I've gone with Azure Functions is because it's a quick response back to the user. So we can quickly take what's in that Power App, the name that the user has put in, the naming convention that's applied to it, go away, tell Azure Functions, hey, check my tenant to tell me if this team exists. If it doesn't, let the user proceed. If it does exist, tell the user and maybe they can pick a different name, or they can join the team that's already exists for whatever they like. So you'll see for any PowerShell people there, you'll see I'm essentially just connecting using Azure Functions to Microsoft Graph. I'm querying based on the display name that the user has sent in the request. And I'm returning either exists true or exists false, so to say whether that team already exists. One cool thing about a lot of the Azure integrations we can do is we can actually use a system managed identity, so that we don't need to have a traditional service account anymore. We can give the function, for example, access to query the graph and the roles that we want to allow it. So we're not running a service account for that kind of stuff. We've got a SharePoint list in the back end that will hold our log. That doesn't need to be a list. That could be Dataverse. That could be some database that you want to integrate with. Again, like I said, all these pieces are interchangeable and whatever solution works for you, but the core concept is that through Graph API and automation, you can definitely provision teams in the way you want them provisioned. A quick look at the workflow behind it. So we're looking at a logic app here. So the first thing we're doing is tracking or monitoring that SharePoint list. And when a new request is added to that list, we're triggering the actual provisioning of that team. So it updates the status on the SharePoint list to say it's provisioning. If the team requires approval, so this is where I said if it's external, we're going to send an approval email. If it's not external, I'm happy enough to create that. I don't got to approve an internal only team. It's going to be locked down. So we go ahead and create it. We update the tracker as we go, just to have that log there so that we don't have to jump between our different automation solutions to find that. We've got the logs tracked in the SharePoint list. If a team was rejected, we'll obviously reply with an email to say that it was rejected and give the reason that it was rejected. And then this is where the logic app ties in with Azure Automation. And this is one of the cool things because we don't need the flexibility of Azure Functions to return a result automatically. We can use Azure Automation to build out this team. So once the logic app has run through the workflow and done all the error checking, we then pass this on to Azure Automation runbook that accepts the parameters we've given it and runs through a script to provision that Office 365 group, SharePoint site team, all of that stuff based on the criteria that's passed along. Looking at our automation, you can see the parameters it accepts are the team name, the privacy, whether it's internal or external, the external domain that, if it is external, the external domain that it's allowed to share with, the two owners, and the justification for creating the team, and that goes into the description then. Again, we're using the managed run as account. We're connecting to Azure Key Vault. And the reason we're connecting to Azure Key Vault is because we don't want to hard code any of our connection strings, anything like that, that's all sitting securely in Key Vault and only accessible from our function and our Azure Automation piece. We don't need to hard code anything. One troublesome piece that I hope will be resolved soon is that delegated access is required for one component here, and that is applying the sensitivity labels. So if you look at the Graph API, the support calls on the Graph API, applying a sensitivity label to a group is only supported with delegated access, which it's a bit of a pain, but we can absolutely work with it, right? So we're storing our access token within Key Vault, and we're pulling that as we need. You can see here within Key Vault, I've got 4 secrets declared. I've got my access token, I've got my app secret, I've got my client ID, and then I've got refresh token in there. And the reason I've got refresh token in there is that we, when we request a Graph API authentication token, that is active for 59 minutes. And then we use the refresh token to get a new access token. So when we need to run this, we got to have a valid access token. So essentially what we can do is just keep that access token alive using the automation by calling the refresh token and updating the values. The run as account in Azure Automation has access to Key Vault. Again, we're not hard coding any credentials. We're actually allowing the service principal to do what it needs to do. You can see there on the Key Vault, we've allowed contributor role on to that service principal. And now the basic script that you could set up really quickly within Azure Automation. So first we get our token from Key Vault, we get our client ID, and we get our tenant ID. We create first an Office 365 group. And the reason we create an Office 365 group is because the Teams endpoint does not currently support the assigned labels piece. So if we want to assign a sensitivity label at creation, we can't do that if we create it as a team. So we first create it as a group. Other reasons that you would do things like that is if you want to have a custom URL for your SharePoint. So maybe you want to follow a different naming convention for your SharePoint site. You'd need to create the SharePoint site/group first before the team, because those parameters are not available when you're just creating a team through Graph API. So when we've defined our JSON body with all our variables in there, we invoke a web request and send that on along with our token and say, here's my access token and here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to set up a new Office 365 group, and Office 365 and the Graph API will go ahead and do that for us. And because this is a demo, there's probably a lot more error checking and error handling you could put in here for a robust solution, but I didn't want to overcomplicate it with all of that code. I wanted to kind of show what we're actually doing, what the active parts of the code are. And then once that group is created, we go ahead and call the Graph API to create a team from that group. So you teamify the group, I think is the term. We specify the group's endpoint / the ID, the group ID / team, and we call it put request. And then we can, we've specified these settings here, but if you want to add them into your solution for the user to choose it, or you want to use a Teams template, that can also be done too. It's really flexible when you automate your graph. Right. Then we've got a small sleep timer just for replication to make sure that the actual request has gone through. And then we fire off the put request using the invoke rest method again. Extra tip, and this is available on my blog as well, but to keep that delegated access token alive, you can use a script very similar to this to use the refresh token to claim a new access token every 59 minutes or wherever often you'd like to do it. Now, with that kind of presentation piece out of the way, I want to jump over to what this looks like in practice. So bear with me while I stop and start presenting. So I'm just going to refresh this because this has been open for a little while now. So this is our Power App. We can integrate this, and I have in the past done something like this where I've integrated into a SharePoint site for a customer, or you can use a different front end. You don't need to use Power Apps. Like I said, you can use in-house tools if you want. You can integrate directly with your service desk tool and have it as an offering through there where someone can request it using a familiar service request that they use in-house, and that will then trigger the workflow. Okay, but first of all, let's request. So we want to call it TeamsNation. It's fine to be internal. We could make it public, and we select the secondary owner. And we want to check availability. Now this is going to go off and trigger that Azure function to go and ask my environment if this internal TeamsNation exists. If it doesn't exist, then we can go ahead and hit create, and that will fire off the request to Azure Automation, which will go ahead and run that code in the background. So I want to jump over and follow through the logic app. Okay, so the first thing that happens is our tracker, a SharePoint tracker, and I've just done this from a tracking perspective and log perspective. Our SharePoint tracker is updated, and our logic app is monitoring that tracker. When that's updated, logic apps will pick up on that. It will take that request, update it to in progress. It will check if the team requires approval. If it does, it will send the approval mail. If it doesn't, then it will update it to approved itself, and it will create the job through Azure Automation. And then once that all finishes, it will update the tracker to complete. We've got an Azure function here. And just to go back, you can see here we've got our access token come through. This is the endpoint that we are looking at. So it's a grouped endpoint, and we're filtering for where the display name matches the display name that the user has chosen. If it exists, it returns true. If it doesn't exist, it returns false, and that will give that feedback to the user now. And finally, the creation of the team through automation. If we go view, you can see here it's using the managed service account. It uses the Key Vault module, and for the Key Vault AZ.Key Vault module, the prerequisite for that is that you've got the AZ.accounts module. It's assigning a label if it's external, and what that label is doing is locking that team down as we specified. If not, it's not assigning a label. Goes through, connects to pull the Key Vault details. A little bit of error handling. If it's external, it applies a classification, and then it goes ahead, builds out the JSON body for the graph request, and submits that request to graph. And that's kind of how you would end-to-end manage, and really kind of briefly, because this is quite an in-depth topic, but at a really high level, that's how you can automate the provisioning of teams to give that governance that seems to be missing from standard out-of-the-box solutions. You can build that in-house, and you can customize it so that it makes your users' lives easier without giving you too much of a headache. So I'm going to jump back to the slides just for a sec, and then I kind of want to open questions and answers. So to summarize the solution, use the tools that are available and any other tools that you have access to build your own solution for it to make life easier for your users and for yourself. Look at the security and governance and compliance features in Microsoft 365 holistically. I see a lot of people that focus on particular components within the security stack where you don't get as much value back as when you start looking from a high level and how they interact and talk to each other. When you're applying security, don't get in the user's way, because then they'll find workarounds. Be creative when you're thinking about how to solve problems with the features in Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Azure. You can get creative and think up some really cool solutions that are actually not that difficult, as we've seen, to implement. Provide a good experience for the user, and no matter what you do, always consider user training and change management to help your deployment succeed. Okay, and with that, I want to open it up to questions and answers now. I see one has come in there. Where did you find the define limit, the sharing per domain? Okay, yeah, so that is done on the SharePoint site itself. So you can specify this at a top level. So you can specify a global sharing whitelist. I think it's called a whitelist, but that setting is also available on the per site level as well. So one thing to mention on that though is when you're going down the road of a per site whitelist, you need to have your top level less restrictive than your per site configuration, which means if you're going down that road, you need to make sure that you go fully down that road. If somebody can still create a site without going through a model like this, or without IT checking it, or with no monitoring on it, then there's potential there for unintended external sharing.
Brilliant session, Sean. Just while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I just want to say, look, what you've covered here is becoming more popular with a lot of organizations I work with, where they're wanting to move away from that people just be able to create teams or having to log like a support ticket or something so that they have locked it down. So are you seeing that a lot as well, with people wanting to move away from the Microsoft way of doing things and make their own ways, like I said, of automating it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's particularly with organizations, like we had a wave of organizations that adopted Teams when Teams was originally released, and they loved that, and they kind of ran into this problem early, right? Organizations that have potentially maybe moved off Skype recently, or that have adopted Teams as a way of combating the work from home and all that kind of stuff, they're only seeing this problem now. Now, this isn't a kind of a new idea. This was always something that you could do. It's just the more technology Microsoft makes available, the more tools that are in that toolbox, the more flexible you can really be with what you provide with out-of-the-box tools.
Brilliant. Does anyone else have any further questions? I see one just coming in, but before we take that question, I have unmuted the microphone, so if you do want to take yourself off mute, please do and ask Sean a question. But we've got another question there, Sean, of how do you troubleshoot these if users say something is not working? Are you able to do some login easy enough?
Yeah, so because it's not a set solution, right? It's a logic app essentially managing a workflow that touches on multiple different tools. You can, as part of that, like I showed with the SharePoint piece, you can add your own logging. So you can get really flexible with the level of detail as well that you log. If you want a complete transcript of everything that's running, I would say maybe copy that off to a storage account somewhere, or pipe it into Log Analytics, where you, depending on the scale of your solution, right, you can be flexible with the troubleshooting and logging piece.
Does anyone else have any further questions at all for Sean?
Hi. I maybe have a comment. So if you take the idea further and you go from teams to creating channels, and inside channels you want to create folder structures, to say you want to do an end-to-end automation, because you say we have project, we have customer, we have projects, and we don't want to have a defined structure. Then the channel creation now on the Graph API has some good news that they had the problem that when you created a channel, somebody had to go into Teams to get these folders thing happened, and it looks that this is now fixed.
Yeah, and that was a big problem for migrations, particularly with private channels, right? Because you would automate the creation of teams for that migration, and if a user didn't go in and actually open the files tab, the endpoint wasn't there to migrate into. Okay. So I'll stick around if there are any more questions, pop them in the chat. If not, my details are there if you want to reach out.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Sean. Great presentation. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen quickly, just to run through a couple of bits. But again, thank you both for presenting today. So Ville and Sean, really good presentations, really insightful stuff. Love the workplace analytics stuff and what's going on around there. Brilliant stuff from Sean as well. Really thought about the processes around that governance piece and loving it that you're using Azure Logic Apps to do it in such a real smooth way of doing things. Just to close up then, next month's meetup is on the 18th of October. So again, please go to that monthly meetup, register your interest on there, add it to your calendar, come along. Had some great feedback from today. Really good stuff. Keep coming, because you guys are the ones that help us with these meetups. If it weren't for you guys, we wouldn't be here. So keep coming along, keep putting in your submissions to talk at these things, and really good to be involved. Again, follow us on social media, Twitter, Meetup to join our meetups. Keep an eye on the site for any latest news and so on. YouTube. So if you joined this session late, don't worry. Well, do worry, because you missed out on some real good content, but don't worry, you can catch up via the YouTube channel. So that will be up soon. Not sure on dates, but that will be up. So please do go and subscribe to that YouTube channel, check out previous sessions and so on. And also Twitter and LinkedIn are probably the best places to keep up to date on what's happening within the TeamsNation world of things. So again, next meetup, 18th of October. Big shout out to our two speakers today. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you everyone for joining today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.